Peace, peace, peace. So wait for YouTube to tap everybody on the shoulder. For those of you that kind of hops on, let me know if you can hear me. If I'm clear. So peace. Yeah, if you can, let me know if you can hear me. If I kind of tap into this, just want to make sure that I am heard. Okay. So peace. So what's up? So y'all know I'm Satori Seals, and one of the things I like to do is help us to understand ourselves and see what's happening in our lives. And I use the Living Soul Numerology System to help go about doing that, along with a host of different things. I'm also a energy bodywork and therapist as well too. So some of you are already familiar, like I said, the wide range of things. They really help us to understand things from a spiritual perspective, from a practical way. So what I want to do is, I was kind of requested to kind of tap back more in on a live that I did, and I was talking about the basis of spiritual psychology. So I want to do a basic focus on that, basic spiritual psychology, part two. And I want to bring the focus and attention to seeing the matrix. Because here's the thing, for those of us that are on a spiritual quest, and when we're talking about a spiritual quest, we're talking about the quest of self-awareness, our pursuit of truth, an understanding of how, what our flow is and our proper alignment is in this life as we navigate through the day-to-days in our life path of who we are and what we are. And so in that quest, in that pursuit, and a lot of this has been introduced or been maybe platformed through certain religions or whatever. So I'm not here to really talk about that. I'm talking about the spiritual part, like, yeah, astrology, there's a lot of different paths to come to the self-awareness, and that's the basis of spirituality. It's not an allegiance to religion. It's the basis of self-understanding and understanding your pursuit of truth and seeing the truth in things. And so when we talk about that, we go in some different wisdom texts and spiritual texts as sources for, for our own awareness, you begin to see a common theme across many different philosophies. And it's always mentioning about our relationship with the world, being influenced by the world, and how we are to operate in the world. Well, the world is actually synonymous with matrix. Okay, so when you go into certain word studies, you'll find the word matrix that's synonymous with the world. And then when you interesting, when you find the word matrix with the world, you begin to uncover and see that it refers to cosmetics like we use for makeup. So the world, from a spiritual point of view, from a metaphysical understanding, is looked at the matrix that brings about impressions of cosmetics. In other words, it's a mold that sends impressions in a certain system framework to convince us of something that really is not. Okay, and so of course when I say that, that brings to mind of what? Deception. Well, deception is able to be prevalent when there's a lack of what? Self-awareness and not having access to truth. And so that is the basis of spiritual psychology. So basis of spiritual psychology, in whatever path you're looking at, it should help you get awareness of yourself, to understand what's going on in life, and be able to see the truth in different theaters in life. If that is not occurring, then you're not really on a spiritual quest and a spiritual path. Okay. And spirituality doesn't mean that you're just overly emotionally expressive or whatever. It's a very practical and very measurable understanding of things that is actually happening. And so I don't want to take too long today because I'm going to continue to, talk about this in different pieces. Okay, so the basis of spirituality is, first of all, is looking at your your quest to truth and your understanding of self-knowledge. And also now I'm adding in your relationship with yourself as you move through life, as you are dealing with the world. In other words, the matrix. Okay, and again, so the matrix is a mode to convince you things of what is that actually is not. And like last episode I talked about, when we talk about the matrix, one of the things it does is it affects you and I, and it creates a battle, right? And the battle is us keeping in alignment with our self-love, or we are getting fragmented from our self-love. And so there's impressions in life that causes us to be split from our self-love. And when that happens, it begins to affect our esteem, our determination, and willpower. So one of the things when we talk about the matrix is that if it keeps you divided from self-loving yourself, then it's able to shift your esteem, your determination, and your willpower. And then ultimately you begin to act out, make decisions, form relationships, pursue different things that might be out of who you really are. This is why when you get on a spiritual path, people start to get a rebirth, quote unquote, or an awakening of who they really are in relation to life. Because they start to realize there's a realization that occurs that I've been operating in a quote unquote programming or in a series of impressions that I've been trying to actualize in my life, that I hit this point, a moment of clarity to realize is it doesn't really mirror truly what I really am in the heart of what I am in terms of how I see myself. So the quest of spirituality will probably quickly thrust you to look and see that there is a different image that you now are desiring to align with versus the image that you was operating in. Okay, and so this is the effect of the matrix. The matrix can have us operating in a total different persona, totally against what our own personal truth is. Okay, so any spiritual path or spiritual systems or whatever is supposed to be designed to help you come back into self-awareness, self-knowledge, and to understand the truth in different theaters in life, and also the truth of yourself. Because then you're equipped to move forward in your own self-autonomy as an individual in life. Matter of fact, some of the behavioral challenges or the psychological challenges that we might have can really be all traced down to our relationship with truth and our relationship or our understanding of self-knowledge. So that means there might be some issues with what we identify with, how we identify ourselves in situations, and also the level of type of information that we get that either is going to help enlighten us or is going to blind us. Okay, and so again, this is all falling up under the scope of the matrix effect. So what I want to do is just point out some basic things, and you take this and you observe and answer it for yourself in order to see the matrix. So I'm talking about see the matrix. We're talking about, are you able to recognize when things are being presented to you that really is not true, right? Can you recognize the deception? Can you recognize these things coming at you? Because if not, then we all are susceptible to align with those counter persuasion that goes against our self-love. Okay? And so again, that affects you and I, that shifts a path that you're on. And so the challenge is to recognize these things and to what reroute our lives. This is why it's important for us not to play with spirituality. I like to say, don't play with people's souls, because when we're trying to get on a spiritual quest, we're trying to get back at one with ourselves and be able to find the harmony or the path that moves us in the place of self-understanding and understanding the truth in things, so that way we can make what choices and begin to engineer our lives that mirrors what the picture that we have inside ourselves to be. But when it's not, we find ourselves conforming to the system or conforming to the world, we start to operate in these compromising and these self-sabotaging tendencies, whether we know it or really or not. And so to help uncover that, this is where the pursuit of spirituality comes into play inside the system, right? So the world system, in other words, the matrix, it creates cosmetics. So the term before is makeup. So it gives you these decorative things to think one thing when it really is not. Okay. And so that points to, some of you know, we've been talking a lot about shadow and dark psychology. Okay. And so this is referring to dark psychology. So in spiritual practices and stuff like that, they're always talking about the world because it's trying to get us to understand that there's a dark psychology that's constantly at play, that's constantly engineering people outside of their self-love. And so in order to go from the dark to light psychology, we have to get people to merge back with love. So the basic measure to see the matrix, to recognize, is if we don't see love being displayed in different areas in life, then we know the matrix effect is happening right there, because it's got people being divided from what? Love. So here's the first thing. So in certain environments you entertain, workforce or whatever, rated from 0 to 10, do you recognize more love or more apathy? So use that as a spectrum, right? The closer it is to the apathy, the more you realize the matrix has an effect. Because one of the effects of the matrix is to blind the minds, and then it shapes and affects our interaction with each other, which is why in life, we see a lot of conflicts, right? We see us at each other. We see all these different disfavorable experiences in life happening because we're aligned in the wrong frequency, right? The wrong information patterns, right? The wrong psychic patterns, the wrong emotional patterns that create certain results. It creates these environments for certain things to exist and to perpetuate itself that can work against our self-love. Okay. And so fundamentally, we want to get back to self-love and begin to express that self-love. So it then changes the dynamics and the experiences that we have here in life. So the first thing to look at is, in my experience in the environments I entertain, the social, whatever, is there more apathy or is there more love being exuded? 0 to 10, right? On the 0, so the 0 point is apathy, and 10 is more to love. So you begin to see where is it going, okay? Then we let's think about everyday life. Let's look at politics. Let's talk about politics, but look at politics. Can we stand here and say all the decisions, all the influences that's going on from the political part that's affecting social life, does it favor more profit or does it favor people? In other words, are they more mindful of profit or they're more mindful of people? You got to dictate and determine that. But I would say if it's more focused on profit than over people, then we know the matrix effects is going on. If you talk about the areas of health, of our areas of wellness, the food that we eat, we look at it. Here's the spectrum: nutrition versus synthetics. Is the system in the world trying to engineer us more to eating synthetic foods, over nutritionist or nutrition dense type foods? You got to ask yourself your question. In the area of education, is the system trying to align us more in theory versus reality? We're talking about theory, and we got all these diverse of opinions, but never really getting the truth in different areas in life that we should be learning and being educated on. So are we handed more theory, or are we handed more reality? Or is it point us more into theory, or point us more into reality? We talk about economics. A lot of us know a lot of us are under economic squeeze. So overall in the system, economically speaking, even though we're doing what we need to do to generate income for ourselves, try to take care of our family, take care of our loved ones, to expand ourselves, whatever the motivation is, let's look at economics. Let's put the spectrum there. Simple question. Do you think the system favors more oppression or more sustainability? Do you feel like our ability to sustain ourselves is constantly under attack? For example, if you got exceeding rising gas prices, but people's regular wages are not matching or moving at the same pace of the rate of inflation, that's a result of it. That's a result of oppression. That's challenging what our sustainability. So I'll just go ahead and keep it right there, keep it real right there. Okay. And so when you look at these different spectrums that I want you to look at this question for yourself, ask yourself, this is how you can recognize, this is how you can see the matrix. You can see the matrix operating because behind it, there's a knowledge base. There's an energetic influence behind these things. So I'm giving you these questions to look at the different things to measure so you kind of can see there's something that's totally operating against something that might help sustain my self-love. It's influencing different areas that keep me pulled or is highly likely to pull me out of or bring a war or a challenge inside myself against my self-love or against my truth and against my soul purpose. Okay, so when you look at that, when you see those things, it makes you begin to really question what motivations are at play at here. Last spectrum to look at in the area of religion, right? Does it favor more indoctrination or does it point you more towards self-love, self-knowledge? Be honest with yourself. If you have a certain path where you're on a spiritual path or whatever, is it more emphasizing rules or practices that kind of focus on the indoctrinating piece? Or is it really pointing you back to yourself, into self-knowledge and to self-love, and then encouraging you how to operate from that space? If not, that's the matrix effect, and it's affecting us in many different ways. So I just want to just point this out today to how to see the matrix by using those basic different questions, different spectrum-based questions I put out there to understand, because the end of the day is the battle with inside everyday life is to wrestle against conformity, conforming to things that doesn't really serve you, conforming to things that works against your self-love, conforming to things that's constantly having you question your own identity, conforming to things that's pulling you outside of your innate purpose and natural drive, the passion to do, conforming to things that make you compromise who you really are as an individual. So the next question becomes, spirituality is now, are you willing to create an aversion? Are you willing to wrestle against that because you don't align with that? And then if you are willing to wrestle against that, do you have access to a template, to a counter paradigm? Do I have access to truths in order for me to reroute and shift myself in order to enact in a way of being totally adverse to the conformity of the social matrix that's trying to have me isolated in a certain reality that I no longer agree with, I no longer find myself aligning with? The basic thing of spirituality is about alignment with the higher source, the higher power. God, the supreme intelligence. Then the thing is being able to what? Love yourself to the point so that way you can bring the love to others and bring the treatment to others. And then when we bring the treatment to others, we begin to affect the social dynamics. It really is that simple. But if we're seized, controlled, and isolated inside the matrix that's moving contrary to those basic fundamental things of self-love, proper spiritual alignment, and our treatment of each other, then we'll never begin to see, we'll see less of us moving in a direction where we are creating uplifting environments, or we're bringing this high elevated state of being that we really could be operating in versus operating in this lower state of being. But it all comes down to choice. And that's the challenge, because the world system is constantly affecting our choice. In other words, our paradigms that we decide from. So that's what's up. So we'll touch back down again on this, and we'll dig more into this. If you want to gain more insight, I have a Soul House community, and we are actually doing a series right now. It's focusing on shadow and dark psychology. So inside the description, or you can go to the bio link, you can click there and join the Soul House. We're getting right into it. So as soon as you join the Soul House, we'll try to make sure to get you the copy of the book, Shadow and Dark Psychology Insights, so you can begin to get up to speed and understand some basics parts about shadow and dark psychology in relation to yourself. And then we can talk about how it's being displayed, hourly in the social paradigm of things. All right, so that's what's up. So we'll touch back there. One love.